Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at this new episode of the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening. I'm here with my wonderful friend, Fran, soon to be retired and then full-time RTT therapy practitioner. Fran is in Northern Alberta, Canada, and she's a full-time teacher. Now, by the time this aired, Fran would be not a full-time teacher anymore. She would be doing RTT full-time. Fran and I decided to create this space about 2 years ago now, and it's been absolutely amazing because we really felt to bring hope to people. My name is Marina, and I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and I am a full-time rapid transformational therapy practitioner and clinical hypnotherapist. And I'm very happy that Fran will be joining me in that journey very soon. Fran has a wonderful guest for you today that she will introduce. We love that we bring a lot of people to you that help us to spread hope around the world. And we just have another wonderful lady with us today. So Fran, over to you.
Thank you, Marina. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, whether you're a first-time viewer or whether you've been up with us for a long time. Thank you. And it is my pleasure to introduce Chris Chandler. Chris Chandler is a writer. Not only is she a writer, she helps others to write. Chris is a storyteller and a book lover. She's a two-time cast member of Boulder's Listen to Your Mother show and has been published on scarymummy.com and in the Boulder magazine. She lives in Boulder, Colorado with her husband and is the mother of two adult sons and one bonus daughter. She helps others find and tell their stories by facilitating writing circles for women. Her website is www.writingunleashed.net. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you
And
so much.
oh, it's good to have you here. And we learned about you from a fellow guest that we had previously on our show. And we were just so blessed to have you here. You're also an author of your own book, a published book, and you give hope to women. And Chris, I know that there's a lot of women who have a story to be told. There's
Yes.
lots. There's two of us right here. And Marina is also an author too, as yet unpublished. And I have a lot of stories to tell. But Chris, you actually did it. But how did you get from 0 to 60? What was your story? What's your background?
Well, I grew up in a, a Southern family that has a really strong oral tradition, but a very casual one, nothing formal. And I grew up, I mean, my whole life just hearing stories constantly being told in my family, and I was constantly, when I was with my family, asking to be told stories over and over and over and over again. And so, and I've been writing, I mean, in some form for much of my life. I, as a younger person and certainly an adolescent, started out with journaling, and then as I moved into adulthood, started working more with personal essay, although I really didn't think of it, I didn't have a name for it at the time. I just wrote. And then I started getting more interested in learning about writing, taking writing classes, and was often a member of informal writing groups. And so that went on for 30 years. And I have a local writing group here in Boulder that I've been with for about 8 years. And I started to notice, or just become more conscious, probably in about 2017 or 2018, that these family stories frequently emerged in my writing, and that when I would read them to people, and particularly in my writing group, people always wanted more. And so it finally occurred to me that, and I knew the stories were important to me, but it finally, I started to wonder if there was something more to it. And I wondered if I could bring it together in a collection of stories and essays that were reflections on home and family that would add up to a whole collection and essentially to a memoir. And in 2018, I believe it was 2018, was taking an online writing class, and I wrote a piece, and then when I went back and read the whole thing, I thought, I think I just wrote the first chapter. And indeed, it did become, in somewhat altered form, the first chapter. And so that was really, that moment really brought it together in my mind. And so then I just thought, well, I'll start putting it together, and I went back to some old writing, pulled stories in, and most of those had to be changed in some ways, and then started to just wonder and think about what the connective tissue was, to start to think about other stories that I wanted to tell. And so over the pandemic, that's when I really sort of dove in earnest, and now there it is. It's a book.
So the pandemic did a lot for all three of us, right? Marina and I both became hypnotherapists as well during the pandemic because
Wow.
I don't know, it was just the energy, the movement of the energy, right?
Well, I started to work online predominantly, which was quite interesting. So my question to you, my first one, is about the writing circles. Tell us about that.
So I facilitate writing circles for women, and they're small, 6 to 7 people. And I use poetry as prompts, and it's poetry that at least I find very accessible. I did not, when I was in school, and even though I love to read, the poetry that I was taught, I did not find accessible. And so I try to just use things that speak to me, that I understand, and that I think are going to speak to other people. I read the poem, I'll read it twice, and then I will pick 3 phrases from the poem and offer them up as prompts, or as I call them, jump off lines, because I think of them as like a diving board that it gives you some like kind of a little boost, and it provides something for the mind to latch onto. The mind, for most people, the mind doesn't really like the blank page very much. Even when people feel like they have something to say, they sit down and stare at the blank page, and then the mind can really freeze or go blank. And so I just offer up those prompts, and then we write by hand, no electronics. I also really think that there is something to that connection, and I don't have any research or proof for it, but I think there's something that's from the connection, like the brain down the arm to the hand, to the pen, to the piece of paper, that is just different than writing on the screen. And, on the screen, we have these things that pop up that stop us and correct us. And a lot of the big idea behind this process is pen to page, don't stop, don't correct yourself, don't edit. So it's meant to be a freeing process and a non-judgmental process. And I don't find that doing this practice on the computer lends to that. And so we do a timed, usually 10 to 15 minutes, everybody writes, then we go around the circle, everybody reads. There's no criticism, there's no feedback. It's just a witnessing and a hearing of somebody's words, and then we do it all over again. And one of the biggest things that I find is that people are often, and understandably, feel vulnerable and feel like they're exposing themselves and exposing their innermost thoughts, but it never fails within a cycle of that somebody writes and reads something that somebody else needs to hear. So to me, the most gratifying part about it is that it's I think of it really as a community healing practice. It builds community and it brings people together and it makes people feel less isolated and weird. Um, because we all experience the same things and the same similar feelings, and so to sit around a table with other people who also offer those up is it's just really nurturing.
How often does your writing circle meet?
They're weekly. It's for 2 hours, and um I've done a variety of lengths. I really feel like I've done sometimes just 4 weeks. I think ideal is like 6 to 8 weeks, but I offer different things depending on, like, often in the summertime offer things that are shorter, and then other times during the year offer things that are a little bit longer to try to match the sort of the flow of the season and people's commitments.
I find writing pen to paper is very therapeutic to me personally. So I can just imagine in a group like that how much healing takes
Yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah, it really does. And people, over the amount of time, of course, the group builds trust as well as people read and reveal themselves and are just willing to be more vulnerable with each other.
Chris, you talk about you believe that there's something, a brain connection between the brain and the hand, holding that. And I've believed that for years as a teacher, because the kids will be like, can we do it on the Chromebooks? And I'm like, nope, why
Yeah.
not? And they're like, why not? Why not? And I'm like, and I made this up, right? Because I have to think of something. So I'm like, back in the day when warriors held a spear and they had to be like focused, there was something about holding the spear and throwing it that, the brain hand connection was, in paramount. So I mean, it was a little bit of white lie on my part, but I really do believe there's something about this
I
holding a pen.
I do too. Yeah, and
They're
when
they're
I
more
get
creative.
stuck in my writing, because I often, if I'm writing an essay or something, I mean, I often do work on the computer, but if I get stuck, one of the best ways for me to, well, there are two ways for me to get unstuck. One is to get rid of the screen and go, pen to page. And the other one for me is to move, whether it's walking or vacuuming or driving. It's crazy. All I have to do is get up and move around, and it it's like it just starts to flow in my head in a way that sometimes it won't if I'm sitting still. So there's something about that brain body connection, I think.
And it activates a different part of the brain. Holding a pen activates the more creative part of the brain. And so, drawing and all of that, what kids will do is, if they get stuck, they'll start doodling on the side of their
Oh yeah,
page. They'll do the little, they'll put their name and they'll do the little curly cues, and then just this movement,
yeah,
the doodling movement, then they'll
yeah,
think of something and they'll get going again,
yeah.
which is super interesting. I mean, no one would have predicted that when, every classroom has a computer per student, usually, right? No one would have predicted that, but I believed it for a long time, the
One of
brain
my
and hand
kids
connection.
was uber active, and we actually homeschooled for many years, and I read to my kids a lot, and I would be reading to them, and he was 6, 7, 8, and he would be, and I'm not joking about this, standing on his head, doing somersaults, um, laying on his back and like flipping his feet over his head off the couch. And I would just think, oh my, like, how can he be getting any of this? And so we read a chapter, and then I would say to him, can you tell me what happened in this chapter? He just had it. But sitting still did not work for him.
That
Did
just
not work
makes
for
me
him.
that just makes me think people who are ADHD and how misunderstood they are, because I'm very ADHD, and years ago I did a class as an adult, and the lady said, if you're ADHD in this class, I want you to bring something, whether it is something to sketch and I said, can I bring crochet? She said yes, and I did, and I crocheted an entire tablecloth for my mom while I was in that class. And for the first time having that freedom, I retained so much information. So my older son, who now has a PhD in chemistry, in junior high, one of the teachers called me in and said, you know what? I was going to report to you today to say that this kid does not pay attention whatsoever until I quizzed him. And he knew more in the class than anybody else, but he could never sit still. Still today, he's always bouncing something. So
we used to learn, like, do math facts, jumping on the trampoline.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I should have tried that.
Yeah. I love the title of your book, Stay
Thank you.
Sweet.
Yes.
Tales of Quirky Southern Love. And even just the word quirky, I was having supper with my daughters. I have two adult daughters that are in their late 20s, and just having supper with them, and I'm like, hey, do you guys think I'm quirky? Somebody called me quirky the other day, and I don't know whether to be offended or not. And they're like, Mom, of course you're quirky. Of course you are. And they mentioned all these quirky things that I do, and I'm like, and that's okay. And they're like, yeah. But why did you choose that title? Tell us about your book.
So the main, one of the main threads that runs through my book is my relationship with my maternal grandmother, and her name was May, and that's what I called her. And whenever we hung up the phone or we said goodbye, one of the things that she would always say to me is, stay sweet. And so that's where that comes from. And then my family is quirky, but it's a completely it's a complete compliment as far as I'm concerned. Just, and I think of quirky as like individual, and I don't know, just people who are willing to, like, be themselves and
Unique.
and really let their individual characteristics show. And some of and it made me realize too that some of my absolute favorite people are people who are quirky, and they're like the people who I don't know, I think some people might say it's annoying, but I find it endearing, like the person who is like incredibly loyal to quilted northern toilet paper, and that's all they'll buy. I'm like, I don't know. They just, those things that, I guess that's really the things that like make us us. They're those really individual habits and preferences, and I don't know, maybe ways of speaking that I love about people.
And your book is a book of hope.
My book is a book of hope. So, one of my main, so I had two big goals in terms of writing it, maybe three. I have always wanted to write a book, and for a long time I was like, I don't know what I'm going to write a book about. So that was a big goal of mine. But I wanted to preserve the stories for myself and for my kids and for my cousins. But the other big part of it was that there's a whole segment of memoir that is that it's not easy. They're not easy stories, and those are important because those help people know that they're not alone, that there are other people out there. It gives them perspective and strategy, and so I think it's really important. But I have a story on the other side. I had a very, very happy in many ways. And I mean, not without some challenge, because we all have challenge, but a very happy childhood. And so my hope was to provide something on the other end. And this is a happy story. They're sweet stories, they're funny, they're poignant, and they're just these reflections on home and family and belonging. And so I wanted to bring something. It felt to me like this was my offering of like medicine to the world. There's of these happy, quirky stories.
I think it's difficult, right? If you come from a background where there was something unpleasantness, dysfunction, stuff you don't want to talk about. You want to hide that stuff and dig it deep and cover it up.
Sure.
And I think there's a fine line between sharing too much and not enough, and not bringing enough hope and goodness. And, there's a light at the end of the tunnel into that. There's a fine balance between being authentic and being okay with it, right?
Yeah.
Being okay with it. How did you find that? Like, how can you share stuff? How do you share stuff that's difficult to share in a soft way? That's a question. I don't know
That
how
was a dilemma I had over the weekend. I had to write something. I was on a deadline, and when I read it back to myself, like, my gosh, that was so harsh. So I had to think exactly that. How am I going to take the sting out of it? How am I going to soften it? How am I going to still ooze love, regardless of the history to the situation?
Well, and I think one of the things is that, there's personal writing, that where you just fling it all out there. And that is a process of working through it and maybe coming to terms and, seeing what you've learned. And then I do think there's, for things that you're going to offer up to a wider audience, hopefully you're able to bring to that those things that you have learned through the former writing. What have I learned, or how did this serve me, and how did it, how was it difficult, but also where did it take me in my life? But yeah, it's I think it is really hard to write those really difficult things and figure out where the lines are, and also to figure out like where your personal lines are. It's like, how much do you want to offer up, and how much feels more personal and private to you, and everybody has to decide that for themselves.
So I think I hear you saying that if you work through it first, right? Do your own work. Do your own work on yourself, get to a place where you can look at it objectively and say, yes, that was dysfunctional. Yes, that did really happen. However, this is where I am right now.
Yeah.
And this is truth, but this is truth.
Yeah.
And I was able to get through it, or my family was able to get through it. It built me to be able to be where I am today.
I mean, I know I do, and I think that most people come to memoir, reading other people's memoirs, to find perspective, certainly to find community, and I think a lot out of curiosity. I mean, I know I certainly do. It's like I'm curious about other people and how other people live and what they've experienced. And but I think the big thing is not just that, but then it's like what did they do with that? You know, how did they come out the other end, and what did they take away?
Well, I find writing itself, especially when you write personal things, it's very cathartic.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said at the beginning. It's just that clearing of maybe that having to put it down. And again, putting it down on paper is so powerful.
Hmm.
So, Chris, when you wrote your book, the one that got published, did you do it by hand or did you do it on did you, type it? What did you do?
I did a variety. So I do a lot of my writing in a program called Scrivener, and so I do a lot of reading, a lot of writing on my computer, but I also do a lot of writing by hand, and I do a fair amount of the sort of free writing that, at least similar to what I facilitate in my writing circles, where it's just like pen to page, however long, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, just go for it. And again, I find the benefit of that is that when I'm writing like that, and even though I'm fairly practiced at this, I still have to work to not stop and correct and make it right. But it's really fascinating to me if I really follow that process. It leads me in places. I end up in places where I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't know I was going and there. I mean, I didn't necessarily have a destination, but it's just really like fun and surprising to see where I end up. And a lot of times, most of it is, I mean, it's fine, but maybe it's not, I'm not going to keep a lot of it. But one of the things I love about these kind of pieces of free writing is then to go back to them, like set it aside for at least a day and go back to it. And then I describe it to my students as mining for the gems, because you'll come across sentences or phrases or a paragraph where you realize that, oh, like I really am onto something there. Like you get to these places where it really has lots of energy, and 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 so then those were the pieces then that I and then I encourage other people. It's like, oh, okay, lift those, and then you can go into a more crafting kind of mindset. It's like, okay, well, that's something that I want to expand or do something with, or I love that turn of phrase. But it gives you these great starting points, and then it also takes you places where that are just surprising and that are really then productive and that become things that then you can expand.
Tell us about the Boulder, the two-time cast member of the Boulders Listen to Your Mother show.
Yeah. So Listen to Your Mother is a show that is produced by two women in Boulder who do an amazing job. And the show happens on Mother's Day weekend, and they solicit original essays from local authors about motherhood. And that's a wide, pretty widely applied. And they have auditions, and they cast, it's about 10 people to read their original essays about motherhood. And their limit's about 5 minutes. And it's done at the Boulder Theater, which is an old movie theater that's been turned into a performing arts space. And it's really a wonderful evening. And they do an amazing job, curating the essays, and they, move from funny to poignant to sad to so I was cast in 2019, and then the pandemic happened, so that show still happened, but it was over Zoom, and that was sort of a weird experience because you're reading this essay, and because it was done sort of webinar style, there's no feedback. You're just like reading into the void. And then I auditioned again in I guess it was 2020, and I can't remember 2020 or 2021, and I was cast again, and that was the first live show after the pandemic, and that was just really, really, really fun. I mean, I wasn't nervous, but I didn't know. I'd never been on a stage before in front of 450 people. And I just loved it. When I finished, I said, I want more of that. I just, and, because the audience responds and they laugh and they sigh, or they, and yeah, it was a trip. And to make 450 people laugh it was really incredible, and just a great group of all the cast members were amazing. All their essays were amazing. Unfortunately, they have a license, and unfortunately they're not allowed to like videotape it and post it online. So those don't exist anywhere. But it was a great experience. I really loved it. So it has made me think a lot more about what are the opportunities for, reading live. And I do have one coming up in August. There's something here called the Story Collective, and they're doing something similar where they choose a topic, and then they solicit essays. And so I am going to do that on August the 12th.
Mm-hmm. And scarymommy.com. What is that about?
Scary Mommy is actually a really great website. I think it's grown a lot since I published on there, but it started out as a lot of I think sort of true. I mean, they're all true, but just people speaking like their truth about motherhood and about being mothers, and it's not always pretty, right? And so I wrote an essay. It's still on the site, but about what it's like to go away. I go away as a mother of youngish children. Go away for the weekend and come back and find out that like everything is exactly as you left it, and like the elves haven't come, and there are still dishes in the sink, and the kids and your husband ate pizza all weekend, and nobody vacuumed the rug in for you to come home.
Sounds so familiar.
And yet nobody died either, which is
exactly.
right.
Yeah, but I was just like, oh, would somebody who just vacuum before I come home?
Yeah.
And
yeah, good luck with that. Yeah. I remember when I used to go away, the kids would phone me, like, Mom, how many hours are you away from home now?
yes.
And I'd tell them, and they're like, oh, okay. And darn well that they waited till the last,
yeah.
hour to do all the things on the list, because it was like, why bother? We'll just phone Mom, find out. Yeah.
Yes, my kids called me one time. They were home with their dad, and they were, for some reason, mad at him for something that he had told them they couldn't do, and so they called me, like, to try to get me to referee. It's like, I'm not doing that. Talk to your dad.
So why did you choose Writing Unleashed as your website? What Writing Unleashed?
Well, so that came from a couple things. One was just this idea that this writing practice is freeing. I feel like it helps people to unleash themselves, let go of the tether, be free. The other reason, and it's a like a private double entendre, is that we love dogs, and the other part of our lives is that we actually own a company that makes dog toys. So being unleashed has, and we've had dogs for, well, ever since we've had dogs like since 1990, often 2 or 3. And so the idea of like a dog unleashed and running through the grass or whatever and following the smells is also really speaks to what I try to help people do with their writing.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Extremely enabling. I love the concept. It's wonderful just to guide them to unleash whatever is in them. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very amazing.
And to really care for you. And when you do think about a dog off the leash,
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing more joy. I mean, to see the joy in a dog off the leash, there's no greater joy, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the smells and just the energy of it. The
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah, it's just that sense of freedom, and I just love to watch them, how they just, they don't go in a straight line. They're here, and then there's something there, and then and that's one of the other things that I talk about when I guide people through this process, is that, again, I tell people, I remind people frequently that this is not school. And most of us, I mean, I think, unfortunately, we only learned about the 5-paragraph essay. And honestly, I mean, when if somebody like told me that I needed to write an outline for my book, and I just said, I can't do that. The idea of writing an outline makes me want to cry. And I mean, granted, I know that can be useful, but there's this whole other area of writing that is not, I don't think, at least initially, helped by this really rigid structure. And so, again, I'm sort of with people at the very beginning part of the process. And so I'm like, yeah, if I say to you, and this is actually a prompt that was it in one of, I think, one of Barbara Kingsolver's books, Natalie Goldberg's books, but one of the prompts is, tell me everything you know about your mother's teeth. And so what I tell my students is, okay, so number one is, you are free to ignore me. And my only rule is that you put your pen to the page and you keep writing and you don't edit. But if I say, tell me everything you know about your mother's teeth, and that reminds you of your mother's teeth are pearly, and that reminds you of your grandmother's pearls. And then you think about a time that you were at the movie theater and the string broke and all the pearls went everywhere. Like, that is awesome. And that is that dog running. It's like, okay, the teeth, the pearly teeth, the pearls, the bouncing. And, so if you go in a complete zigzag line in your writing, there's nothing wrong with that. That may not be the finished product, but I think it's really important to follow those smells, because I think that is what gets you ultimately to, oh, that's what I really wanted to say. Oh, that's what's been on my mind, even though I kind of didn't know it. So that's where I want to help people go with their writing.
And even the metaphors You know, like you can think about my mom's teeth were as pearly as, you know, as white as a string of pearls. And
Right.
when she lost them, it was as though, you know,
Yeah.
the necklace had broken and they were scattered everywhere. I don't know, I'm just making that up. But right, I mean,
Yeah.
you talked about the hidden gem within the writing, and
Yeah.
you know, I would have taken a highlighter and highlighted it
Yeah.
after a day or two, and
Yeah.
then use that highlighted area somewhere else
Yeah.
to remember that, hey, that
Yeah.
was pretty good. That,
Yeah.
you know, that metaphor or whatever it was, a simile metaphor, that sounded pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that made me think, I don't know, you asked me earlier if I wrote my book on paper, and one of the other things that I had to do a couple times was uh, when I was trying to edit, was I finally had to just print out the entire manuscript and spread it out and literally, you know, like in the old days, cut it up and tape it back together. And then when I was my book is not 100% chronological, and so, and I also have this mix of family stories, more reflective essays, and in these little vignettes. And so so it was a challenge to try to figure out what order to put those in. um and so this program that I use, Scrivener, allows you to do a synopsis for each chapter, and then you can actually and you can color code them if you want. So I color coded them by theme, and then I also, it allows you to print them out as note cards. And so I printed them out as note cards and then cut them out, and then I could just lay them out and actually rearrange them and actually see, you know, with these little synopses, okay, how does it all flow together? So a little bit of, you know, back to the analog, for sure.
So, Chris, if people want to buy your book, what's the best way to get hold of it?
They can find it on Amazon. It's also on Barnes and Noble if you want to get it online. Bookshop.org. You can order it through there, and bookshop.org supports independent bookstores. Or you can just ask your favorite bookseller to order it for you.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's awesome. So the name of the book is Stay Sweet, Tales of Quirky Southern Love.
Sounds
Well,
amazing.
thanks for joining us today, Chris.
I can
It's
show you.
been
Show
a
it to you.
joy.
Oh, there it
briefly.
is. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And if you have one last message of hope for our viewers or aspiring writers or just people who decided to pop in today, what would be your message of hope?
Well, particularly for writers, I would say to just, for risk of sounding like a Nike commercial, just do it. But yeah, I would say, like, yeah, just get out a piece of paper and a pen and start.
Right. And people can get hold of you through your website, writingunleashed.net.
Yes.
Any way else to get hold of you, or is that the best way?
I'm on Facebook. I'm at Stay Sweet by Chris Chandler.
Okay.
I'm on Instagram. You can just find me by my name. And also on my website, there's a Linktree link, so you can find all the ways to reach me. I also do I have an email. It's Chris dot writingunleashed@gmail.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again for being here. This was wonderful. I
Thank
really
you so
enjoyed
much.
it. And yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening, watching this. We always appreciate our audience being here. You keep us going, and we will see you next time. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you, Marina.